Hi guys, it's Kirsty. In today's video, I want to talk about how note-taking, recording of things and over-planning in relation to OCD or anxiety recovery can become compulsive. So I want to give some examples of how this kind of almost need to over control the recovery process can become compulsive, and some ways that we can go about approaching it. But before I get into that, I would like to ask, please do subscribe by clicking on the subscribe button below in order to stay up to date with new videos as they're released. So I will begin by giving some of my own examples of how kind of taking notes and making records of things became a bit of a problem in my own OCD recovery. It became a bit of a compulsion for me first, and then I will give some other examples of some other ways it can become slightly, people might be recording or note taking, and how that could also become problematic that I've read about and heard about from other OCD sufferers. So firstly, I have showed these books in a couple of other videos that I've made, I think about my own recovery, and I may have spoken about my experience with therapy before I moved on to working on my OCD with rational emotive behavioural therapy. So prior to that, I'd been working with doing psychodynamic therapy, which involves some CBT. So in addition to thought restructuring, I'd made a lot of notes, and I just want to show you what this could look like. And at some point I'll get rid of these, but yeah, I just haven't got around to it yet. So as you can see here, pages and pages of sort of listing what I needed to do, listing what I would need to work on, challenging all the thoughts that I've had, listing the thoughts that I had as they popped up. So I would get my phone out when I was on my way into work, stop in the middle of the street in busy London streets and write down that thought with a view that I would need to challenge it later on. So that was one of the ways that I was kind of, doing this note taking. I was obviously very desperate to recover. This is another book that I had, full of writing of thoughts, and with a view that I would be going in and I would be challenging them. So, and I'm not talking about disputing of irrational beliefs, I mean challenging thoughts, which obviously, as we know, it's almost becomes a way to get instant relief, and it can become quite compulsive. So during this time in therapy, I found myself writing, lots and lots of notes from, what the therapist said, so that I wouldn't forget what she said, because I couldn't take the risk in my mind of missing anything important that she might be saying to me. Now, this also ended up, for me, going into my working with OCD recovery, when I began to learn more about OCD and learn more about disputing of irrational beliefs. During my sessions, one-to-one and group sessions, I would be desperately trying to take notes about what Rob was saying, and in the end we discussed that note taking needed to be kept to a minimum, because we realized it was becoming it had become, and had actually been for a while, a compulsion of mine. Now we might find ourselves doing this because we're terrified of not getting better, and of course when we're terrified of not getting better, we know that contributes to the fear cycle, so it's not particularly helpful. So I recommend, if you are finding yourself maybe being a bit desperate with your note taking during or after therapy sessions or coaching sessions, it might be worth just trying to reduce that a little bit, and accepting uncertainty that you may well not have remembered every single detail. Something else that I used to do compulsively, and it's only been recently I found this record on my phone. What I'd been doing was screenshotting interesting, helpful things that I would read on social media, or screenshotting helpful things that people might have written in the WhatsApp support groups that I was in, or anything that I'd read online that I thought was helpful. Now, you'd think, what is the problem with this? Maybe. But if you saw, I wish I still had it so I could show what this looked like on my phone. I had photos, like pages and pages of photos of screenshots that I've taken of these things. And when it goes to that extreme, you realise this actually does look a bit desperate. And once again, it's that desperation for recovery, not trusting myself that I'm kind of going to retain the knowledge that I've learnt and read. So again, you're fueling the doubting cycle there, because you're not, trusting your memory. You're not allowing any chance of uncertainty or anything, but you've got it right there. So that was something else that I did. And I'm not saying that all the time this would be wrong. From time to time, screenshotting something that's helpful to you, that's great. And you might want to share it with other OCD sufferers or anxiety sufferers. But if it's something that you're screenshotting because, God, I can't let myself forget that, and then you go into your phone and realise that you've got 50 screenshots from the last couple of weeks, I think then it might be useful for you. Maybe you could even take the risks and delete them and start again with it. Or not necessarily start again to do it compulsively. I mean, take the risk of deleting them, and then from time to time, if you come across a useful one, you can, screenshot it for reference for a little bit, and then, after a week, delete it. But if you can think that it's becoming a serious compulsion, I recommend stopping the screenshotting, just stop it altogether, or stop it for a while, because as I said, you're fueling that kind of fear cycle of not getting better, fear cycle of not doing recovery right, adding to the kind of doubting cycles that you're not, saying, I'm not going to remember this, like you're not trusting yourself essentially to retain the information. Another thing that I found myself doing, and after a while doing it a little bit too much, was journaling about my progress. So I didn't just, it wasn't just a case of today was a bit better or today was worse. It would include, how stressful work had been, what I'd eaten, kind of a bit of an overview of what I was eating, if I'd had any alcohol, if I'd exercised, what exposures I was doing. I'd give details about the thoughts that I was having as well. And you might think, well, what's wrong with that? That's, you're taking the ball by the horns, you're taking control of your recovery, and you're working out what works for you. Yes, it's useful to know, to see what feeling crap this day. Okay, is there anything that I've been doing? And then you can identify sometimes compulsions then. But for me, I had become compulsive in this process because I would feel panicky if I couldn't write my journaling for that day. I would go back and amend stuff on it if I remembered, and I had to do that in the moment. Basically, I just continued doing it for months in ridiculous detail, and I realised that it was starting to become compulsive when I would get panicky if I couldn't record how I had been doing for that day. To do it day by day and spend a certain amount of time doing it, but like in that day is, again, you're encouraging yourself almost to doubt. You don't trust that maybe the following week you'd remember that you had a slightly better day. Now, it is useful to try, after a while, like when we talk about setbacks in our recovery, after a while, you start to realise that you can come out of that setbacks because you remember, and you start to trust the process that, oh yeah, I did have that other terrible setback and I came out of that. But the problem is, if you're like making a huge effort to record everything, to remind yourself of things, again, it's almost done in a way of it's coming from a place of fear, and that's not what we want to be doing. It's over control, and if you do it the way I did it, in terms of I would be talking about, you know, what specifically was troubling me that day, you know, specific thoughts and things like that. And of course, this gives everything a lot of attention again. So you know, you're shining the attention on those thoughts again. So you're once again encouraging, you know, the fear cycle. You're playing into it if you've got this desperate need to have to be able to log everything. And then another thing that I would do also was over planning things, basically. So I've just done a video about life structuring OCD recovery, and several other people have discussed it on this channel, and it's useful to look at you know, hear this from different people's perspectives, because of course, you know, what you understand from one person might be different from another. So the way I speak about things might be less clear than the way Oliver speaks about things in terms of your interpretation. So it's useful to you know, watch videos by different people, even if it's on the same topic sometimes, because you get different takes on things. And as I said, people interpret things differently. But swiftly getting to my point is that I did this video about life structure because it's something that's considered to be generally very important for recovery from mental health difficulties. Now, life structure means a level of consistency and a level of keeping busy. But what it doesn't mean is being 100% rigid in your planning of your sort of days and time. Now, this was something that I became a bit rigid about, which again is a bit sort of compulsive, and there's some avoidance there in terms of you're avoiding any kind of spontaneity or anything. And this was off the back of my journaling. So where I realized that I was having better days, I'd be over you know, vigilant of planning when I, you know, needing to do things in certain days. So needing to be able to do my journaling, needing to be able to do a mindfulness meditation, and God forbid I, you know, didn't exercise in case, you know, because then maybe my mood would be worse if I didn't get exercising in that day. So I started to realize that sometimes maybe my my OCD symptoms would be enhanced if my mood was worse. So I'd be sort of trying to avoid anything, you know, plan my day to avoid anything that could you know, affect my mood. And that, but of course, the way trying to over control that, of course, be that level of rigidity, I don't even know if that's a word, but being that overly rigid and not flexible means that if something does happen in life that throws you out of your plan, your ability to deal with that in terms of managing your own moods and reaction to that would be negatively affected, because you're saying to yourself, the day must go like this, I've planned it like this, and if it doesn't go like this, it would be completely awful because I need to get better from OCD. And you're saying all these things, and of course you're going to get extra upset, wound up, anxious if something comes along, which inevitably at some point it will, and throws you off your strict plan for every day. So that was another thing I did that was quite unhelpful. Other things that I've heard that people have done is writing down things, notes, and carrying the notes around with them, you know, on pieces of paper to refer to when they're at work. And again, this can swiftly become a reassurance behaviour, like you might be reassuring yourself of the facts around OCD and looking at it regularly throughout your day. And of course, if you find yourself doing that, ask yourself, why am I doing that? And if the answer is to relieve myself of the discomfort I'm feeling right now, then that's a compulsion, and I recommend stopping it immediately. So the thing that all of these things have in common is that it comes from a place of trying to over control your recovery. And if you're trying to over control your recovery, it means that you're saying, I must get better. If I don't get better, it'd be terrible. And that means that you're probably terrified of the idea of not getting better. And of course, the more we're terrified of something when we're suffering from OCD or anxiety, the more we're feeding into it, especially if we're taking part in behaviours that back up that belief that it would be awful, you know, if we were to not be able to recover. So if we realise that we're doing these things compulsively out of the fear of not getting recovery right, firstly, I would recommend reducing how much of this note-taking, over-planning, or, record-taking of everything. Reduce it if you can't stop it straight away, or put yourself on, on a diet from it. So 2 weeks without it and see how you get on. If it makes you feel anxious or uncomfortable without it, then you know that it has definitely become compulsive, and reducing it or stopping it has been the right thing to do. The next thing I would recommend is starting to dispute the thing that you're afraid of. So if the thing that you're afraid of is like, well, if I don't do these things, then I might not get better, then the fear is I'm afraid I won't get better. So the belief is it would be awful if I didn't get better. I must get better. If I don't, it'd be awful. I couldn't possibly stand it. So again, this is where we want to be looking at, yes, of course, symptoms, the OCD symptoms are incredibly distressing. It's very, very difficult, but we want to reduce how awful we believe it is. So we might want to start looking at our perspectives on things and consider, well, what is worse than OCD? And by the way, this is not me sort of downplaying how difficult OCD suffering is. I know damn well, as much as anyone else, how bad it can be from my own experience, but also from my interactions with others with OCD and what I've seen. So we want, it could be helpful to be looking at maybe a child who was born already disabled perhaps, or somebody who's just been who is younger than us, who's just been diagnosed with terminal cancer. So you can really start looking at these things, and this is not in a way that we want to, this is not toxic positivity. This is acknowledging that having OCD is not, obviously if we had a choice of brains we wouldn't choose the brain with OCD, but this is what we've got. And we are learning that OCD is something that can be recovered from. There are lots of things that people can't get recovery from. There are lots of things that can kill people. So if we start to really, really, really look at these things, we can see, okay, it's bad having OCD, but not as bad as we thought, because there's other things that are so much worse. And if that's the case, if there's something that's much worse, then this can't be as awful as we realized. Looking at changing our perspective on our OCD is a huge factor in our OCD recovery. So other things we can look at doing is listing, okay, what are the downsides of holding on to this belief that my OCD is awful, I must rid myself of it. So you could think, well, it affects my constant, it makes me feel even like down when I have intrusive thoughts. It's like, okay, well, obviously if we believe that our having OCD is awful, then every time we have intrusive thoughts, we'll feel not only anxious, but we'll feel down about it as well. So why else, what other bad things might come out of holding on to this belief that having OCD is awful? I'm spending so much time thinking about how awful it is that I'm actually being taken away from being able to focus on my recovery. Then there also might be something along the lines of, well, I'm spending so much time having to, plan everything and journal everything that actually my relationship with my partner might be so I'm not spending quality time with my partner or my children, or I'm being so rigid in terms of how I need to be spending my day, so that I know that I'm doing everything that might make me feel better on that particular day OCD wise, that I'm actually losing contact with my friends at the moment, or actually I missed out on going to that festival that I would have liked to have done because I couldn't possibly stray from the plan of what I needed to do in order to keep my OCD in check. So you could really start like going into as much detail as you want to, listing reasons why it's not so great holding on to that belief that OCD is awful. What you've missed out on because of the things you've been doing to you know, the compulsions that you might have been doing to back up that belief. And in this case, it's over note taking, you know, checking again of the notes that you've taken, over screenshotting, over journaling, over planning of your days and you know, your recovery, etc. And then looking at the good things that you can gain from it. Oh, spontaneity, you know, it might be that maybe I allow myself the flexibility of, you know, taking an evening off for a change, doing all the things that I plan to do and having a bath or watching Netflix or just something, in addition to the obvious thing here, and that is reducing your fear of having OCD overall, which will, in the long run, help with your OCD recovery. One last thing that I wanted to mention here that would help you with your perspective about OCD is to consider the time that we have OCD in, so the time that we're suffering with it. So we are in 2021 now, state the obvious, Kirsty. 200 years ago, if somebody had a taboo thought, they might have been burnt to the stake. Whereas when we have taboo thoughts, we can eventually, after a bit of compulsive Googling perhaps, find ourselves learning about OCD. The fact that people are able to access this YouTube channel is huge. This YouTube channel wasn't around when I was actually at my worst. I was lucky still obviously to have access to the internet and all the other amazing social media that there is about OCD, and various articles, so I was able to learn about it. But even this you know, over the last year or so, this YouTube channel has been created, which is you know, a resource for people to educate themselves about the different themes of OCD and hear about other people's journeys. Several years ago, people didn't have access to this, so they'd have felt even more alone. So it's just good for us to have you know, acknowledge what we do have rather than, you know, what we don't have, and that is an extremely clear and structured exact guidance to recovery. No, there isn't that, because it's different for everybody, and as we always say, recovery is not linear. But what we do have is a lot of resources, and we have access to other OCD sufferers that we can speak to in order to not feel alone. And all of these things, like when we really consider it and change our perspective about OCD, we see it's not as awful as we thought. It brings down our fear of having OCD itself, and therefore we don't have to do these over controlling kind of ways, you know, this as I said, excessive note taking, over controlling planning of our recovery, etc., because we can accept the uncertainty. Okay, maybe I won't remember this note that I've read. Maybe I won't remember everything that I've learned in this session. Maybe today I will feel a bit worse because, you know, I'm not doing the things that I was doing on that particular day when I felt, you know, a big reduction in my symptoms in that particular day. We can accept uncertainty better when we're not terrified of the worst case scenario. And in this case, the worst case scenario is not doing recovery right or not getting better from OCD. So I hope this video has been useful in terms of listing some of the ways we might do kind of over note taking, over recording of things, over journaling, over planning, etc. Why we might find ourselves doing it, and with some tips how we can reduce these things and how we can kind of reduce our fear of not doing these compulsive behaviours. So I hope it's been helpful for you, and thank you for watching. Take care. Bye.